Okay. Good afternoon. Let's start. I think it would be fitting to begin with some sort of broader statement about this three-part series, Dilemmas of Jewish Power. But maybe we'll have to wait until the end of the series for those broad statements. I don't see where our study takes us. I guess the one thing I will say is that I'm trying to highlight in the series titled Dilemmas of Jewish Power, really two different areas in which Jews exercise power in the contemporary world. One in the sovereign masters of our own sovereign state in Israel, and also as participants in American democracy, where we also assume our portion of responsibility for everything that our government does. And these are two forms of Jewish power which have very different the degree of responsibility, the manner of responsibility is going to look very different, but I think both of them are worth considering, especially the subsequent, the second and third class in the series. Right, next week we're looking at just and unjust wars, sort of broadly speaking, kind of like ethics of warfare, and in the just and unjust wars, and the third week is battlefield ethics itself. Certainly those latter and torture. Both of those issues, again, would definitely be germane to Jews who are exercising sovereignty here in America as part of a multicultural democracy, as well as Jews who are exercising sovereignty in the state of Israel. This day's class is really entirely relevant to a Jewish state, that's the point, and what is the role of non-Jews in a Jewish state, and how does that fit in? We're going to look at some ancient texts, verses in the Torah, some halachot, that emerge from those verses as they're understood by some of the Rishonim, some of the early commentaries, the early halachic scholars. Then we'll look at the end, and I'm going to make sure to sort of reserve enough time to look at the end to how some of these texts and issues have played themselves out in contemporary Israel. I guess the sources at the end are really only they're only the good guys. So I guess it's sort of one way in which these texts have played themselves out in contemporary Israel, but those are the voices that I want to kind of share with you and promote and highlight. Okay. The Torah introduces an obligation to completely eradicate members of these 7 Canaanite nations who were living in Eretz Yisrael at the time of the conquest. Source 1 on your sheets. Utterly destroy them. Lo tichor lehem brit v'lo tichanem. You can't make a covenant with them, nor can you show mercy upon them. Lo tichanem, that phrase though, will have another meaning in later halachic sources, beyond how it's used here. Source 2, ki acherem, tachrimem, utterly destroy them, extirpate them. Hachiti, v'amori, v'kanani, v'aprizi, v'achivi, v'avusi, k'asher tzivcha Hashem l'kecha. All of these 7 nations must be completely destroyed. This is moderated in later halachic history. There might be some ways that the members of these nations can surrender. Rambam says explicitly that the members of even these 7 Canaanite nations can surrender. The Torah doesn't seem to doesn't make that explicit. It's also worth remembering that these 7 Canaanite nations do not exist anymore. Okay, this never happened. If you read, Joshua and Shoftim, we never, in fact, killed these 7 nations. And Sennacherib eventually came into Eretz Yisrael from Ashur, from Assyria. And the Talmud says Sennacherib came and mixed everyone up. He incorporated all of these little kingdoms and city-states and little chiefdoms into this massive empire and moved populations around in order to solidify his empire. That's when the 10 lost tribes got lost. And it's also when all these other nations got lost as well. And so there are none of these nations, none of the nations actually that the Torah describes as having a special status of the Moabites and the Amalekites and the 7 Canaanite nations and all these special rules about all these various nations. None of these nations exist. That's a matter of halacha. Sennacherib came and everyone's mixed up, and that just doesn't exist anymore. Nonetheless, that is a paradigm of the Torah. The 7 Canaanite nations, what's the role of non-Jews in Jewish state? Well, if there are 7 Canaanite nations, they have no role, okay, in a Jewish sovereign state. The other extreme, which, I guess there are quite a few psukim that describe the other extreme, is the Ger Toshav, the resident alien. The Torah speaks about the ger, about the stranger, dozens and dozens of times, but the Torah usually doesn't specify what is meant, what's referred to when the Torah speaks of a ger. The two possibilities that Chazal, the rabbis, sort of formulate of what ger means in the Torah are, do you know? One possibility is what does the word mean?
Convert.
A convert. So that's called a ger tzedek, a righteous convert, somebody who, I guess, was a stranger and becomes part of us. And the other possibility is the ger toshav, someone who remains non-Jewish, a resident alien, but who lives amongst us, and we have obligations to protect them and to support them, and they live amongst us. So that's the other extreme. So many of the really nice things in the Torah about gerim, Chazal said that's the ger tzedek. That's the one who actually converts. They're the ones we love and in all these extreme ways. But the ger toshav also clearly exists in the Torah as a category. This person is not Jewish, but they live amongst us, and we have obligations to protect them and support them. Middle categories. What about other idolatrous nations who are not from the 7 Canaanite nations? They also, it seems, are not allowed to live in a Jewish state, even if they're not from the 7 Canaanite. They move into, they come from neighboring lands to settle. If they're idolatrous, they also can't be allowed to settle the land. And the other excluded middle would be somebody who is, the other case category would be a monotheist, non-Jewish monotheist. That's the ger toshav. Okay, that is the resident alien. So look at source 3. Rambam quotes authoritatively, 49th prohibition of the Torah is to allow any individual from the 7 nations to live. This is commanded in order that they not ruin other peoples and cause them to err by following idolatry. Source 3, Lo yeshivu b'artzecha pen yachtiu otcha. Lest they should not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For you will serve their gods, and they'll be a stumbling block for you. Okay, this, again, another these restrictive prohibitions. Look at source 5. The 51st prohibition is that we are forbidden from allowing idol worshippers to reside in our land to prevent us from being influenced by their heresy. Okay, so the source of this commandment is God's statement, exalted be He, do not allow them to reside in your land, since they may make you sin against me. That's source 4. Okay, so in other words, Rambam is telling us that source 4 from Exodus 23 is a broader prohibition against allowing any idol worshiper to live in Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to the sources in source 1 and source 2, which are specific commandments to kill the members of these 7 Canaanite nations. Rambam then continues, though, and says, even if he just wants to pass through our land, we're not allowed to do so unless he accepts upon himself not to worship idols. Once he does so, he's allowed to reside in Eretz Yisrael, and he is called a ger toshav. So the ger toshav is a non-Jew who commits not to worshiping idols. Okay? Meaning that he's considered a convert only to the extent that he's allowed to reside in our land, so it's like a quasi-conversion. Our sages said, who is a ger toshav? One who accepts upon himself not to worship idols. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. An idol worshiper, however, is not allowed to reside in our land, and we do not sell him land, nor rent to him. The oral tradition states clearly, you may not allow any residence in the land. The details of this mitzvah have been explained in Sanhedrin and Avodah Zarah. So Rabbi tells us again, the ger toshav, the resident alien, is somebody who's committed not to worshiping idols. Other idolaters, no matter what their heritage, 7 Canaanite nations or some other nation, they're not allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael, nor Rambam says nor are they even allowed to pass through. Okay. So far, questions, comments, reactions so far? I know I'm aware that I'm rushing, but just want to pause. Okay. Source 6. Let's continue with Rambam. Rambam is is going to be very influential in mapping out these halachot, because Rambam wrote a comprehensive law code, even for areas of Jewish law that were not practiced in his time. Okay, so therefore there are all subjects of sovereignty and korbanot and the Beit HaMikdash, all sorts of areas of Jewish law that were not practiced practically. Many of the law codes did not, like the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, don't have sections that deal with many of these questions because they weren't practiced in the time when they were in these law codes. And if you're writing a practical book, you want to include things that people need to look up and know what to do. Rambam, he had a different agenda. His book was, yes, he meant it to be a practical guide, but he also meant it to be a comprehensive restatement of the oral Torah that would even replace the Talmud. And so any topic that is dealt with has to be included somehow in his Mishnah Torah, which means that in the influencing history of halakha, Rambam was very influential because he decides the law in cases where many of our other scholars don't have anything to say. Okay. This is in Rambam Mishnah Torah, source 6. All the above matters apply only in an era when Israel is in exile among the idolaters, or in an era where the idolaters are in power. When, however, Israel is in power over them, it is forbidden for us to allow an idolater among us. We already saw that. Even a temporary resident or a merchant who travels from place to place should not be allowed to pass through our land until he accepts the 7 universal laws commanded to Noah and his descendants, as it states, they should not dwell in your land, that is, even temporarily. A person who accepts these 7 mitzvot is a ger toshav. A ger toshav may be accepted only in the era when the laws of the Jubilee year are observed. In an era when the laws of the Jubilee are not observed, however, we may accept only full converts to Judaism. So this is Rambam. This is almost identical to what he said in source 5. Source 5 is Rambam Sefer Mitzvot. That's his listing of all the mitzvot of the Torah. He wrote that in Arabic. He wrote that he wrote that first. His magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah, he wrote in Hebrew. That's source 6. And it's the halakha is based, it corresponds, which it should, because it's the same person who wrote them. He adds a detail in source 6 that he didn't include in the Sefer Mitzvot, and that is ger toshav, this middle category, this Gentile who accepts the 7 universal laws of ethical monotheism. This ger toshav can only gain that status in a time when the Yovel, when the Jubilee year is operative, meaning when all of Israel has returned to our land, and everyone has a nachala, and we have every family has its tribal portion of land in Eretz Yisrael, and the Jubilee year returns all the land to its nachala, to its family claim every 50 years, when all of these laws apply, when, in some future era, only then can we accept a ger toshav. Until then, even if Jews are in charge and have sovereignty in the land of Israel, we can't accept a ger toshav. Either you go through a full conversion process to become a Jew, or you can't even pass through Eretz Yisrael. So that we haven't seen in Rambam before. So the Ravid is the Rambam's great critic. He's not just the Rambam's great critic. The Ravid actually, this is the genre in which he most excelled, was the genre of the hasagah, of the gloss, of the criticism. And there are several, he wrote criticisms on a number of different works of other scholars. He and Rabbi Zrachi Halevi wrote several criticisms of each other's books back and forth over a lifetime of real perhaps even animosity, but certainly criticizing each other's books. And that was a genre where the Ravid, like his genius, really excelled. There's certain, you see this, Rashi was a master of the commentary, right? In Tanakh and in Talmud, I said before, not my observation, but if he needed 4 words to say something, he wouldn't use 3 and he wouldn't use 5. He would just say just as much as needed to be said to help you understand the mistake that you might make were it not for that comment, and he would say it in as few words as necessary, but enough words as were needed. That was a genre Rashi excelled in. We have his tshuvot. They're not as good, you know what I mean? Like that wasn't a genre in which he excelled as well. The Ravid is somebody who, he wrote commentaries, he wrote books, but not as well as he wrote Hasagot, as he wrote these glosses. So Ravid writes on Mishnah Torah, commenting on the phrase, and even a temporary resident or a merchant who travels from place to place. This is not found in any source, nor did we ever hear such a thing. The verse he cites regards only the 7 Canaanite nations, and even regarding them, the prohibition is on letting them dwell, not on passing. Ravid further comments on the phrase, we do not accept a ger toshav, but the laws of Yovel. This has no bearing on dwelling in the land. He rejects that as well. Not germane to this conversation. Ravid thinks Rambam is sort of drawing halachot from, and combining them. The verse in Exodus refers to the 7 Canaanite nations, according to the Ravid, not to some other idolater, and even so, it doesn't have any. It only pertains to selling real estate, or maybe renting real estate. Does not pertain to letting one pass through. So the machloket, the difference of opinion between Ravid and Rambam is threefold. One, Ravid says that the verse in Exodus. Let's put it this way. Rambam says there's a prohibition against allowing any idolater to enter the land of Israel and purchase real estate. Ravid says no, it's only the 7 Canaanite nations who can't purchase real estate, and even the 7 Canaanite nations could pass through, on a business trip. Third, Rabbi also rejects Rambam's assertion that a ger toshav, this resident alien status, is only applicable when all the laws of Yovel exist. Rabbi rejects that as well, although to see that you have to jump to source 15. I'm sorry, it's out of order. Source 15. Here's the Rambam. We do not accept any ger toshav other than when the Yovel is operative, Rambam writes. However, in this era, even if a convert accepts the entire Torah, except for one detail, we don't accept him. In other words, Rambam is saying, Bisman hazeh, in this day and age where we don't have the Yovel, you have two options. Either you're a Gentile or you're a Jew. And to be a convert, a ger tzedek, that means you accept 100% of the mitzvah. Okay, and we tell that to it. And that is, at a conversion today, a convert has to accept everything 100%. Doesn't necessarily mean the convert's observance is 100%. None of us have observance that is 100%. All of us hopefully are growing and learning and taking on greater details, greater meticulous, etc. But at least in theory, at least in terms of as a system, a convert has to accept every single mitzvah. If a convert says, I accept every mitzvah except for one, we can't go through with the conversion. The ger toshav, this resident alien who's sort of in between, he accepts the 7 universal ethical mitzvot. Rambam is saying that can't be, right? You can't only accept some of the mitzvot right now. It's all or nothing. Rabbi said this opinion of Rambam is opaque. He does not explain what it means to not accept a ger toshav, other than when the Yovel is operative, or what the mitzvot of a ger toshav are. That we do not let them dwell in cities, but we do have an obligation to feed and sustain them. Rather, when the laws that do not apply, other than when the Yovel is operative, are some which are lenient and some which are harsh for the ger toshav. So, what the Rabbi is pointing out is that the laws of the ger toshav, the resident alien status in halacha, is complicated. There's certain places where he's not allowed to live because when the Yovel is operated, as operative, the land, the farming land, is apportioned to all the different tribes and the clans of the Israelite tribes. And so the ger toshav can only live in certain places, but we also have an obligation to feed him and support him. So there are things that are extra lenient for him, and there are things that are extra strict for him when the Yovel, when the Jubilee year is operative. But to say that the status itself doesn't exist, Rabbi rejects that. No, the status can exist, even without Yovel. Okay, that's an important dispute between Rambam and Rabbi. Yes?
This may really be a stretch, so pardon me if it is. But is this a very, very early example of debates as who is a Jew, what constitutes a Jew?
No, I don't think so. This is not about how to become a Jew. This is there this middle status of the ger toshav? I mean, that's also sort of worth dwelling a minute. Ger toshav, meaning the ideal vision of a Jewish state in all of these early halachic sources includes people who aren't Jewish living amongst us. And that's just part of the vision. And the Torah itself, and the Torah's vision as well. The Torah says, the nevela, the non-kosher meat, you should give it to the non-Jews who are living amongst you. Feed them your meat. So it's definitely part and parcel of the Torah's vision of a Jewish society. Includes people who aren't Jewish. And the question is, what are those people? Because the Torah also says you can't allow idolatry to exist amongst you. So who are the idol worshippers, and who are the 7 Canaanite nations, who it seems we have to kill them, and then who are these non-Jews who live amongst us and we have to support them? So that's the question. So Rambam and look at source 7, maybe this will become a little bit clearer. Okay, who is a ger toshav, the resident alien? So the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, anyone who pledges kol shekibel lav ifnei shlosha chavrim shelo lavor avodat chachavim. Okay, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says you pledge before a Beit Din, I'm not going to worship idols anymore. Sages say all who pledge to keep the 7 commandments of the children of Noah, a little bit more expansive. It's not just I'm not going to worship idols, I'm also going to observe all of the 7 universal laws of ethical monotheism. Others say neither of these standards rises to the level of a ger toshav. Rather, a ger toshav is a convert who eats non-kosher meat. So I accept all of Judaism except for I'm going to reserve the right to eat non-kosher meat, because the Torah has this category, as I mentioned, of you give your non-kosher meat to the ger toshav. So, but other than that, he's a Jew in everything. So it's not a bad way to be Jewish, actually. But that's the status that Rambam is really rejecting. No, you can't accept the Torah except for one mitzvah. Even though here in Tractate Avodah Zarah, it seems that there's one opinion that the ger toshav is precisely somebody who accepts Judaism, except he's going to eat his non-kosher meat. Not to a ger toshav, to a resident alien, right?
A convert is somebody who accepts that.
So this, and this is not done, but this position, Acherim Omrim, this position in Masechet Avodah Zarah, seems to say that this middle category of the resident alien is a lot closer to being, meaning we're trying to figure out who is, the Torah says we feed the non-Jews who live amongst us. So who are these non-Jews who live amongst us? Because the Torah also says we don't allow idolatry amongst us. So who are these non-Jews who don't worship idols? So how much, so is it just, I'm not Jewish and I pledge I'm not going to worship idols? Is that enough to get you in the gate and now you live amongst us and we feed you meat? Or do you have to say, no, not only am I not going to worship idols, I also accept upon myself all of the 7 universal mitzvot of ethical monotheism. And then you get through the gate. Or no, you actually have to say, I'm going to be a full Jew except I'm going to eat non-kosher meat. And that's a strange status. It's a sort of odd to imagine why somebody would go that way, but it's really saying, no, that the non-Jews we're going to allow into our community, into our Jewish society, are really almost identical to Jews. The Torah suggests that we give non-kosher meat to Gentiles. It must be okay, so they're like us, but except for one detail. So it's it's sort of hard to imagine this would really exist, but it's expressing the idea that the only non-Jews would really fully embrace are those who are very much like us, while also recognizing the fact that the Torah explicitly says we give our non-kosher meat to people who aren't Jewish. So how do you reconcile that? All right. So what is, and Rambam sort of adopts this. What is meant by resident alien? Ezer Ger Toshav. It's a Gentile who makes a commitment not to worship false deities and to observe the other 6 universal laws commanded to know his descendants. He does not circumcise himself or immerse, right? It's not a conversion, no circumcision, no mikveh use, but we accept this commitment. He's considered one of the pious Gentiles. Why is he called a resident? Why Toshav? Because we are permitted to allow him to dwell among us in Eretz Yisrael, as is explained in the laws of idolatry. Yeah.
If they didn't worship idols, believe in God, so do they have to?
So first, these, yeah. So it's sort of hard. Like, why would you? Who would this be? So.
Something God, then just convert all the way.
Okay. Okay. Great. So. A couple. So source 9 is going to speak to this. I'll just say, in contemporary times, there are people like that. There are people who. There are several types of people like that. One group of people like that would be Christians and Muslims. You may have met some of them before, which is like most of humanity at this point, who believe in one God, who accept the laws of worship, who have a worldview which is consistent with ethical monotheism, the 7 mitzvot Beit Noach, and maybe that would be one very significant answer to your question. Although there are those who would quibble, and it's not so obvious that you would apply this category to Christians and Muslims. For all sorts of reasons, which I think we'll get to in a moment. The other category, there are actually people who accept a fully Judaic vision of God. They worship God, they believe in God as defined by the Hebrew Bible, and specifically that means, let's say, they reject totally the doctrine of the Trinity, which maybe undermines God's unity, and they're not Christians, right? for that reason. They have not gone through the conversion process either because the Torah doesn't demand it. There's no reason why they should. They're fine, with God. They're good with God the way they are. Or there may be some reason why it's hard for them to convert. My cousin married a woman whose parents are in this category. They're like part of a B'nai Noach, a Noachide community in Texas. They can find on the internet all sorts of Noachide communities. Why have they not converted? They've not converted because the family depends on its livelihood, on the woman's job, and she's a nurse, and she works on Shabbos. She can't, at this point, she can't not work on Shabbos. She feels, maybe when she retires, maybe then they'll complete a conversion process. But they live amongst others who believe in worship in a way that's consistent with them. And they raise their children this way, and their daughter eventually moved east and converted, and she married one of my cousins. But the communities like this exist, and I actually spoke to someone like that who called the shul yesterday, interested in conversion, and she has some serious practical impediments, like where she lives. She doesn't live where there's a Jewish community, and she has real barriers to moving to a city or neighborhood with a Jewish community. So something like that may be what's. But she doesn't feel that she can be. She's not a Christian anymore. She doesn't believe in Christianity. So that it does exist. Source 9, this is Rambam, a very powerful, important sort of statement of Rambam. Right? Moses only gave the Torah and mitzvot as an inheritance to Israel. As Deuteronomy says, the Torah is the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, Morashah Kilat Yaakov, and to all those who desire to convert from among the other nations. As Numbers states, the convert shall be the same as you. Okay, so the Torah is given to the biological children of Jacob and converts who join the Jewish community. However, someone who does not desire to accept Torah and mitzvot should not be forced to. By the same regard, Moses was commanded by the Almighty to compel all the inhabitants of the world to accept the commandments given to Noah's descendants. So the 7 universal commandments, that is obligatory on everyone. If one does not accept these commands, he should be executed. Okay, so there is religious coercion for these fundamental laws of ethical monotheism. A person who formally accepts these commands is called a resident alien. This applies in any place. This acceptance must be made in the presence of 3 Torah scholars. Anyone who agrees to circumcise himself and allows 12 months to pass, okay, that's fine. That's a separate issue. So Rambam, again, he's sort of saying you have Jews, you have non-Jews, but to become a Ben Noach requires also some formal process. Halacha 11, a little bit tangential to our main topic, but it's a very important issue in Rambam. So this is one of the places where a textual emendation dramatically changes the meaning of a text. Usually, in manuscript, you search through manuscripts and this word is spelled this way, this word is spelled that way, next word here, next word there. Usually it doesn't matter all that much. Here, you have one little line that completely changes your understanding of the passage. So let's see what it says. I'll read it in Hebrew and then translate as I go along. So Halacha Yud Aleph, all within source 9. Kol mekabel sheva mitzvot v'nizhar la'asotan harezeh mechasidei umot haolam. Anybody who accepts these 7 universal laws of ethical monotheism is considered as one of the pious, the righteous among the nations. He has a portion in the world to come. Just like someone Jewish, no different. V'hushi kibel otan v'yaseh otan mipnei shetzivah ben HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Torah v'odiyanu al yidei Moshe Rabbeinu shebnei Noach mikodem nitztavu bahen. So this is only true if this righteous Gentile accepted the laws of universal ethical monotheism because Moshe commanded it at Sinai. And Moshe told us, informed us at Sinai, and by the way, all humankind already was obligated in these 7 mitzvot from the time of Noah. Now I'm telling you Jews the extra 13, and that's the source for ethical monotheism. Aval ima sa'an mipnei hachra hadat. Okay, but if he does it just because they seem reasonable and make sense to him, ein zeger tosha ve'ein mechasida mot haolam v'lo mechachmehem. If you do it because of your own intelligence, not because Moshe commanded, you're not one of the pious from among the nations, neither are you amongst the wise of the nations. If you just sort of think of these rules on your own. Pretty harsh, right? Okay. So the rule, the printing edition, the standard edition of Rambam says, such a person is neither from the pious among the nations, nor their wise ones. Vilo mechachmehem. The manuscripts, the Oxford manuscript, which is the best edition of Rambam we have, it's the edition from the Oxford Library, which is the Bodleian, right? It's a version of Rambam that Rambam himself signed off on and said, "Yeah, this is good. This is." And he signed. We have his handwriting, his signature saying, "This edition of Mishneh Torah, I've checked and is good." In that Ketav Yad, it doesn't say "Vilo michachmehem," it says Ella michachmehem. Okay, so it's a vav that's changed to an aleph. So it's one little line, to change the vav to an aleph. So this person is not one of the pious of the nations because he doesn't believe in these laws from Sinai. Rather, he's one of the wise ones of the nation. So it's not so bad. Okay, an important point. Okay. Okay. Next section. We saw the Torah says lo techanem. We're going to be a little bit faster on this. Okay, source 10, 11, 12. We're going to do a little bit faster. Just one of the verses, the Torah says, Lo techanem, right? We can't show them any favor. The Talmud in source 10 says, Lo techanem also could mean, or is understood to mean, by Chazal, we can't give them a chaniyah. We can't give them a chaniyah, like a, what does it say? Hold on the land. Okay, in modern Hebrew, chaniyah means a parking space. But for Chazal, it means like a place to to live, okay? So it seems to be a prohibition against renting or selling land in Eretz Yisrael to people who aren't Jewish. And this is subject to a great deal of interpretation, qualification. Source 11, Meiri says this only applies to immoral pagans, but those who are moral and decent and have a religious worldview and have this ethical monotheist worldview, we can sell them land, and this restriction doesn't apply. Source 12, the Mishnah describes the various rationales for this concern, whether it's we're worried about, and it seems the Mishnah and the Gemara there are debating and trying to work through what this concern is. Is the concern that if a non-Jew owns this field, then now they're no longer going to be giving trumah maisrot. The field is no longer going to be doing mitzvot. Okay, all the mitzvot of Jewish agriculture won't apply to this field, and that's sort of a more ritual concern. If a Gentile takes his field, in which case any Gentile, even Ben Noach, even a righteous Gentile who buys a field in Eretz Yisrael, he's not going to be observing the Jewish agricultural mitzvot for that field. That might be a concern. Maybe the issue, you sell him a piece of property, he's going to be setting up idols in this property, which would obviously be a concern that's only relevant to an idolater. And maybe the whole thing could be, it could also just be an expression of just kind of competition over the land, which could either be greater or lesser relevance in different time periods. This question of lo tichanem comes to the fore, prohibition against selling or renting land to Gentiles in Eretz Yisrael. When does it come to the fore? When does it really need to be, when is it debated in modern, perfect. Say the louder, Marilyn? In the Shemitah year. Why in the Shemitah year, which is this year, that? Why has it become relevant now?
Because we have to let our fields remain fallow, and Gentiles are going to have to observe that.
Good. So what's, okay. And?
The loophole.
The loophole. What's the loophole?
If you
Sell the land.
Gentile, you don't
Okay.
have to.
So in 1888, I believe I'm getting this right, 1888 was the first, right, the precursors of Zion, the first Jewish farmers in Eretz Yisrael in sort of, thousands of years or hundreds of years were the Chovevei Tzion, who established Rishon LeZion in 1882, 1883, I believe. You had a few other agricultural settlements in the 1880s. 1888 was the first Shemitah year following the establishment of Jewish farms in modern history. And all of a sudden, like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? How are we going to... They could not, right, because there were obviously there were tens of thousands of Jews, already, maybe tens of thousands, I don't know, living in Eretz Yisrael at that time, but they weren't farmers. They were artisans, or they were merchants. Most of them were living on tzedakah that was raised in Chutz La'aretz and sort of funded the Chalukah. The old Yishuv, they were sort of supported by world Jewry, but they were not farmers. So what to do? The solution that was derived was by Rav Mahalover and others and Yitzhak Hachanan in Lithuania. The solution that was reached was to sell the land to a Gentile, and then they continue to farm it during the Shemitah year, because the assumption is once the land is sold to a Gentile, then the Kedusha, the sanctity of the land vis-a-vis the obligation to observe Shemitah doesn't apply, and then you can continue to farm the land during the Shemitah year, then the agricultural settlements can survive. The Nitziv, Rabbi Natalie Tzvi Huda Berlin, who had been a major supporter of Chovevei Tzion, was like the honorary chairman of Chovevei Tzion, thought this was outrageous, and this was his break with Chovevei Tzion. This was the end of his relationship with Proto-Zionism over the Shemitah. He felt like, we're returning to Israel precisely in order to observe Shemitah, and he didn't thought the loophole was not halachically sound. And every 7 years, this loophole has divided halachic Jewry over whether or not to apply it or not. Every 7 years, the issue comes up again, but the nuances are different. I think the sale is done a little bit better now than it was in some earlier years. It's more rigorous, it's more real. That's a difference. On the other hand, the need is seen as less acute. Agriculture now is like 3%, 4% of the Israeli economy. The economy really could pay every farmer, not to farm for a year, and the economy could survive, except, as was explained to me, that wouldn't work. Why would that not work? It would not work because Israel's selling its peppers and stuff on the international market. if your peppers are not available in Holland or in France, 1 year, you can't return the following year and expect to have a buyer's for it, right? There's an international, kind of high-level, fruit and vegetable market, very competitive. You have a little niche, like you can get your peppers at this time of year when no one else has them, this global market for fruits and vegetables. You can't just be absent from the market 1 year in 7 and expect to find customers. So it's really like Israeli agriculture would collapse in large part were it not for the continued reliance on the Heter Mechira, on selling the land to a non-Jew during the Shemitah year. And even though it's a small percentage of the Israeli economy, it's still like much of Israel's sovereign territory is filled in by agricultural communities, right? And so you would have Jews only living in a very small part of the land of it. Israel is a very small state anyway. The places where Jews are a majority is an even smaller part of the state of Israel, and would be even smaller were it not for the fact kibbutzim and moshavim and farms that kind of fill in the full expanse of the country. So it's understood by some to support this to be still of strategic importance to the state of Israel.
All of this doesn't take into account that it will be part of a global world. Passing by, travel.
We'll get there. Good. That's an important point. That's a very important point, which I think we'll get to very soon. Okay. So anyway, the debate is lo techanem. Are we allowed to sell? Our fields to a Gentile for the Shemitah year? With that, the source sheets are in the middle. You have to pick up in the middle. Okay. Are we allowed to do that for purposes of supporting the agriculture? Lo techanem. What's the application? So Rav Kook became chief rabbi of Palestine when the British, he became chief rabbi of Yaffo in the early 20th century, and then when the British took over, he became chief rabbi of Palestine. But he, in 1909, someone can take 1888 and count up by 7, what do you get? And then you get, after that, 1895, the next one would be 1902, after that would be 1909. 1909, I think, was the first Shemitah year that Rav Kook was chief rabbi of Yaffo. So that's when he had to write, he wrote his book called Shabbat Haaretz, about the halachot of the Shemitah year, and that's defending the Heter Mechira, sort of making it better, etc. So, this is not from that book, this is source 13, is from his She'elot and Tshuvot, and he writes, the Netziv wrote that Arabs don't have the status of a ger toshav. This is not clear within the position of the Ravid, right? We saw, especially Ravid's lengthy comments on laws, forbidden sexual acts, chapter 14. It certainly isn't clear that there's no law of ger toshav in this era. And so, too, in the laws of idolatry, chapter 10, where Ravid says that overriding the prohibition against Gentiles living in the land is not dependent on the Yovel. And the same could be true regarding lo techanem, a hold on the land. Okay, so this position, this strict position against the Heter Mechira, that lo techanem would apply to contemporary Arabs because there is no ger toshav, right? They're not a ger toshav. They're monotheists. They follow the laws of ethical monotheism. But maybe we can't. Right? We saw Rambam's position. You need the Yovel. You can't just have a ger toshav bisman hazeh in this day, in this era. And Rav Kook is saying no. We have the vision of Ravid, which rejects Rambam, and that is what has to be contended with. At least renting should be permissible, for there is no doubt that a ger toshav can rent, since this does not require the Yovel. Maybe you can't sell the land to him when it's not the Yovel, because without the Yovel, the land will never go back to its Jewish tribal owner. But you could rent to him, because then the land still stays in the family. There's no reason not to rent him. He's not going to bring idols into the field. He's a ger toshav. He doesn't worship idols. And even though becoming a ger toshav requires a Beit of 3, nonetheless, that is only in order to publicize the matter, that he's accepted those obligations upon himself, and one can say that an entire nation that lives according to an ethical code, such as the Arabs do, would be considered as ger toshav. So there's not even an obligation for the ger toshav to come before Beit Din and formally accept that status if he's part of an entire community that are monotheists and live according to an ethical code. And so that even that stage isn't necessary. So renting versus selling is grounds for leniency. There's no reason that Rav Kook says to necessarily assume that Rambam of Ravid is correct. And furthermore, the requirement that the ger toshav come before a Beit Din, the resident alien has to go before a Beit Din, Rav Kook says is not true for an entire community, only for individuals. Okay. The next person who had the other context where this is really has to be worked through is the writings of Rav Herzog, who was the first chief rabbi after the establishment of the State of Israel, and he was really the first one, and to a sort of tragic extent the last one, who really worked through with a lot of seriousness how do you have a modern democratic state with a Knesset that passes legislation, that has a system of rules that are modern, and you can run a modern state according to those rules, and also everything be halachic. How does halakha kind of make space for a modern state of Israel? He wrote a lengthier selection of his writings on that topic, which I printed out in Hebrew and are on the Shulchan. You can pick them up if they interest you. I have a smaller selection here, specifically regarding minority rights, and he's assuming even for this purposes, how can a Jewish state allow non-Jews to live and to buy land and own land and have equal citizenship rights in a Jewish state, particularly goes so far. What about even worshiping idols? Let's say, assuming that certain forms of Christianity may indeed be idolatry, which is a position you'll find in the Rishonim. They have images, and they have Trinitarian beliefs about God, they believe in the incarnation, etc., etc. So can we allow Christian worship even, in the state of Israel? And he frames the question by saying, look, this is the condition by which you were given the right to establish a state. The state of Israel, the United Nations voted for the establishment of the state of Israel, which he takes very seriously as the kind of legal authorization of the state of Israel is the UN General Assembly, the Petition Plan of 1947. That is the legal right by which we established our state. That was certainly and explicitly, actually, on condition that we give equal citizenship rights to people who aren't Jewish. And so that's the predicament that we find ourselves, because that includes the right of, let's say, idolatrous Christian worship also to take place in our state. How do we handle that? He says even the Soviet Union, which isn't so democratic, but they're going to insist that we're democratic, he writes. So he gives four, he says what he says, and then sort of there are four arguments he lays out. First, mitzvot halalu shehen mitzvot, you can see on page 9. Mitzvot halalu shehen mitzvot tziboriot, hamutalot lo al kol yachid v'yachid ela al haguf hashalit, al memshala yehudit, באיזו צורה שתהא שהכוח בידה לקיימן לא הוטלו לכתחילה אלא על עם יהודי הכובש את הארץ ומקבלת הסוברניות מעצמו מבלי להתחשב עם הגויים. הרי זהו רקע בתורה של אותן המצוות, ופשטות העניין מעידה על עצמה. אם כן, איפה בהיעדרו של רקע זה? ובתנאי מציאות כזו שהמדינה ניתנת על מנת כך, אין חלות לאותן המצוות כמו שאין לאותן המצוות בגולה, או אף בארץ ישראל כשאין ידינו תקיפה. So he's saying these mitzvot of where you don't allow certain types of Gentile worship, and you have the Ger Toshav, he has to come for a Beit and you don't allow idolatry. All these rules, those are not personal mitzvot. There's no individual Jew who's obligated to prevent idolatry in Eretz Yisrael. That's a communal mitzvah that falls upon the Jewish people. When does it fall upon the Jewish people? Not when we're under, the Romans who are ruling Eretz Yisrael. Then we don't have an obligation to eradicate idolatry because we're not in charge. It's only obligatory on the Jewish people collectively, not individual Jews, and only when we conquer Eretz Yisrael and take charge with our own power and take sovereignty ourselves. But it's not applicable at all if we're given the right to establish a state by the United Nations on certain conditions. If we had conquered the land ourselves, as described in the Torah, then these obligations would be obligatory on the Jewish people. But since we were given permission to establish a state of our own with certain conditions of democracy, in that case, no. Then these mitzvot aren't even they're not even chal, they don't even fall upon us, just as though we were living in exile, just as though we're living with a non-Jewish government. And and you would never even think to say it's forbidden to establish a state under these constraints. Just as it's not forbidden to live in Eretz Yisrael with a non-Jewish government, the Romans are in charge, or the Persians are in charge, and they don't allow us to prevent idolatry, so a Jew can't live in Eretz Yisrael under those circumstances. Of course not. So you wouldn't say it would be absurd to suggest it's forbidden to establish a state on the conditions that the United Nations, the international community, presented to us. Second answer. Right? The whole reason for these mitzvot are lest they lead us astray. and will undermine our commitment to the Torah, commitment to the Torah's rules. And since he argues Jewish sovereignty, the state of Israel, in fact, reinforces Jewish pride, reinforces our commitment to the mitzvot of the Torah, it's absurd to say, well, we want to accept a state, if the condition is that we have to allow a non-Jewish minority to live and flourish and have democratic rights, because the only danger in the Torah of having this non-Jewish minority is that they're going to lead us astray, and having the state itself reinforces Jewish identification and mitzvah observance. Right, and furthermore, the stronger state, right, and just the mathematics is, right, if you have the whole dynamics of assimilation is, is reversed if you have a majority versus a minority, right? If you, in America, assimilation means Jews will marry the non-Jewish majority, and over time, Jewish identity is sort of lost in through that process. That's mathematics of a minority assimilating into a majority. In a Jewish majority country, assimilation is the opposite. It means that the non-Jewish minority eventually assimilates into the Jewish majority, which is why a lot of the hysteria about the Russian immigrants who aren't halakhically Jewish and what's going to happen will be, right, mathematically they'll eventually disappear into a Jewish majority. I think that's mathematics, I believe. And so again, he's saying the danger is really the danger of assimilation, the danger of our religion being undermined by these Gentiles is lessened if we have a state. Third, by accepting the conditions of the United Nations and international law and giving democratic citizenship to the non-Jews, we can have a bigger state, right? We can incorporate areas where non-Jews live into our Jewish state that enhances the honor of Israel. It enhances the honor of Israel and Israel's God, which is Kiddush Hashem, which is a very, very important mitzvah and has a lot of halachic weight that can counterweigh some of the other constraints. And the final argument he makes, which is, I think, quite interesting, Mikol Amor Yesh Lanu Liponen Od, Halo Yisod Medina Metzmo, Humi Ein Shutfut. The state of Israel is not a Jewish state. It's a shutfut. It's a partnership between Jews and non-Jews to have a state together. And so, of course, they have democratic citizenship because they're partners in creating the state. The state is not, it's not like a big shul, it's a state. A state has citizens, and the citizens aren't Jewish, it's a shutfut, not a Jewish state. Tivach Yadua Ba'al Goyim, Naniach Afilu Avdei Alilim, Lidei Haskama, Litet Lanu, Lakim Memshala, Mishutefet Be'ofen She'tia Lanu Alilut, Yadua, V'Shem Medina Yikral Shemenu. Right? That the state of Israel, it's like Jews and non-Jews, even idol worshippers. We all got together, and since we're the majority, they sort of agreed that we would kind of be more in charge, that the state would be called the State of Israel, but it's still essentially this partnership between us and them in creating the state. It's sort of like an interesting citizenship theory. And therefore, of course, there's no halachic problem with idolaters having citizenship rights in a Jewish state, since the Jewish state is fundamentally their state as much as it's our state. So that's Rav Herzog. Okay, Rav Herzog, state of Israel is not a Jewish state. State of all its citizens, that's Rav Herzog. And state of Israel was not established by Jews, was established by the United Nations Petition Plan. Authorized us to create the state under certain conditions. Fascinating statement. Look at Source 15 we already saw. Source 16 is the Declaration of the State of Israel, not necessarily a halachic document. God's name, of course, famously doesn't appear anywhere in the Declaration of the State of Israel. They did put this phrase, Tzur Yisrael, which was ambiguous enough that the secularists could claim it had nothing to do with God, and the religious could claim that it was a reference to God. The strength of Israel is how it's translated here, but so it could be ambiguous. I think I don't know how many religious signers there were of the Israeli Declaration of Independence. There was at least one who, before he signed his name, he wrote Bet Samach Daled, B'Siyata Dishmaya, and that's how God got mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence explicitly says that everyone has equal rights. Okay, so that's there. It's not a halakhic document unless it is, and we'll sort of introduce that. And we're not going to read through it. Hopefully maybe some of you read it or you heard it read on Yom Ha'atzmaut, but I'll sort of bracket that for now. So 17. So okay, in 2011, Rabbi Shmuel Eliyahu, the chief rabbi of Tzfat, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Tzfat, published a letter forbidding renting or selling apartments or homes in Israel to Arabs, particularly in Tzfat and elsewhere in the country. Eventually, several dozen other rabbis signed on as well. Who objected? Many people objected. Liberals in America objected. Liberals in Israel objected. The Haredim objected. The Haredim thought this was so ironic that the religious Zionist community, which every 7 years sells off their fields to Gentiles, is going to say that the prohibition of lo techanem would prohibit renting your apartment to someone non-Jewish, and that irony was not lost on them, and neither did they pass off the opportunity to kind of rub it in their faces, that ironic use. Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal published a letter in response, which I don't think we have time to read through the whole thing. We don't have time to read the whole thing inside. It's worth reading through. It sort of exhibits so much of what made him so special. The kind of just refusal to accept any, you want to score a short-term political victory that doesn't give you an excuse to distort halakha. You can't claim that the Rambam's position is the only position on this matter. Neither can you distort Rambam's position and invent shitot that don't exist. Even for the best of motivations, don't permit you to distort halakha. And the halakha is complex, and he goes through the complexity here in the prohibition of selling homes to Gentiles is presented as the exclusive halakhic position in the matter at hand, and the voice that burst forth from the throats of the signatories is made to sound like the single unequivocal word of God that is halakha. Here one asks, is this indeed so? Okay. Without a doubt, the position expressed in the letter is based on rabbinic sources and a long halakhic tradition, yet taken as a whole, the document leaves one with the impression that its conclusions are based on presumptions that characterize a particular but not exclusive halakhic approach. Okay, and he gives some examples of how and some of the things that we've seen, among them ignoring the position of Ravid. I certainly do not wish to insert myself into a dispute among giants to presume to decide between Rambam and the Tosophists. I merely note that the required willingness to examine approaches that would limit the prohibitions associated with this issue, given that there are tools and materials that enable such limitations, is completely absent from the letter. So it is a very powerful statement. Eli Fisher translated, he had this website for a while where he was trying to translate into English statements by influential Israeli rabbis that were reasonable. The idea was to try to get them into the press and the international attention that they deserved. So he was trying to find, again, reasonable, normal positions by Israeli rabbis that he would translate. I don't know if I think it ends up being a very small website. Final source I want to just sort of conclude with is a statement by Rav Amital Zatzal. Rav Amital, with Rav Lichtenstein, were co-rosh yeshiva at Yeshiva Har Tzion for 40 years. Rav Amital wrote as follows. We must remember how the sages regarded the episode of the Givonim. The Givonim, you recall, tricked Joshua into allowing them to stay in Givon, where they lived, by claiming to be not Canaanites. Despite the fact that Yoshua's oath had no halachic validity, since it was based on the deception perpetrated by the Givonim, the Israelites did not kill them because of the desecration of God's name that this would have involved, right? Joshua promised to let them live there, but it was based on their lies to him. Nonetheless, to go back on his word would have, been a desecration, Chilul Hashem, in the eyes of the world. The obligation of sanctifying God's name and refraining from desecrating it require the fulfillment of every promise that is made by the leaders of the nation pertaining to the welfare of non-Jews. I am not aware of any more public national promise than Israel's scroll of independence, its Megillat Ha'atzmaut, which was signed by all the leaders of the state and which explicitly promised equal rights to all non-Jewish minorities. The official promise then has obligatory halachic weight based on the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem and the prohibition of Chilul Hashem. Okay, so the Megillat Atzmut, the Declaration of Independence, according to Amital, is a halachic document because it's a public declaration. It's like a neder, it's a vow made by the leaders of the community in the eyes of all the world. Among the things they promise are equality of rights before the law, social matters, religious matters, for all religion, sex, and nationality. Everyone will be given equal rights in the state. That's a public promise. Rav Amital said, you promise something in public, then God's honor, as it were, rises or falls based on how you fulfill this promise. Right? A neder, it's like a public neder, a vow in the eyes of the world, and so it does indeed have a halachic weight. So in terms of sort of sources in contemporary terms for grounding, creating a role, a space for non-Jews in the Jewish state, you have Rav Herzog's very creative reconceptualization of Israel as not really being a Jewish state, being either a Jewish state with maybe b'diavad or conditions that the world imposed, but of course we're still going to accept it anyway because it's this is our chance and it can do so much good even under these conditions that the United Nations impose upon us. Or maybe it's not a Jewish state at all because it's a shutfut, it's a kind of social contract between people of different religions and different nationalities. Just we're the majority, so we get to choose the name. You have Rav Lichtenstein sort of just imploring and calling for just a careful reading and weighing of all the different halachic sources that are not, as we've seen, not unequivocal. They are quite equivocal, okay, and multivocal and nuanced and include multiple voices, including the lengthy position of the extensive positions of the Tosafot, which we didn't see inside directly, but which severely and comprehensively limit and narrowly define all of the Torah's restrictions pertaining to idol worshippers. And then we saw the Amital, who says that the Declaration of Independence itself is a public neder, is a vow before the entire international community, and when you make a promise in public, you're halachically obligated to keep it. So thank you so much. Next week, just and unjust wars. Thank you so much.
Yes,